We'll first explore the nature of the sprint itself. Now, the sprint is a time boxed event in Scrum. It is limited to 30 days or less. The reason behind this limitation is that this is about as long as we can plan realistically in a software development project or in a project of any real complex work. So, this gives us an opportunity to plan the next 30 days, reassess, plan the next 30 days. That said, there are a lot of teams out there, in fact, most, who use shorter and shorter sprints. In fact, what I've learned is that most teams are comfortable with a 2 week sprint. I have, however, seen 3 week sprints. DevDiv at Microsoft, the development division at Microsoft, uses 3 week sprints. They have a big integration problem. They have to integrate the work of thousands of developers each and every sprint. So they have a 3 week sprint and they pull it off in that time. I've seen 1 week sprints. I've even seen a team, as an experiment, try out a 1 day sprint. But in most enterprise development environments, I find that teams tend to settle at about 2 weeks, 10 working days, 14 calendar days, whatever you want to say. And it's important to note that in this 30 days, these are calendar days, not business days. So what we're really saying, what sprint, or rather what Scrum really says, is a sprint needs to be 1 month or less. And the reason for that is because if you think about any plan that exists for doing this complex work, it's going to be invalidated within that amount of time anyway, so we're going to have to replan. The limited duration, though, has some other advantages like limiting risk. One of the things that we talk to Scrum Masters about quite a bit is do the riskiest things first. Those riskiest product backlog items. Do those first. Put them at the top. And let's see if we can turn them around really quickly, because if we can, risk mitigated. The other way that this limits risk, these short durations on sprints, is that the total cost now of the sprint becomes the operational cost of the Scrum team for one sprint, plus any lost opportunity cost, but we can ignore that because you'll incur it no matter what sort of method or framework you use. Risk is also limited by the fact that we get a new increment out every 30 days or less. This mitigates numerous risks that threaten the ability to ship at all. How many times have you gotten to the end of a project and find that you simply, you're ready to go, so you hit the go button, and IT and operations has not successfully deployed the thing ever, but now you're expected to do that at the very end. Well, if in your sprint you get all the way out as far as you can on that definition of done, then you've practiced perhaps rolling out into a staging environment or even production. So we limit the risk of not being able to ship our software at all. Limiting time on a sprint also creates focus. Remember, that's one of the values of Scrum. We all want to focus together. And because we want to create focus, we don't leave time for work that's not part of the sprint to creep into the teams. These software development teams are very prone to having people come up to them in an ad hoc way and say, I've got this problem with this report. I've got a problem with this database, whatever the case may be. Now, that's not to say that those aren't important things, and you can certainly handle this however we need to in the company, but it's the Scrum Master's job to ensure that those sorts of things are not bugging the team and pulling them off track. Now, of course, the team member himself needs to be the first line of defense against doing work that's not part of this sprint. But in any case, limiting the duration of the sprint certainly creates focus because it allows us to point at the thing that we're supposed to be working on and not allow outside work to creep into that. Also, it allows everyone on the Scrum team to understand exactly what's due next, and that can be very helpful. We've talked a little bit about the fact that this is a realistic planning horizon. So, as you're probably aware, conditions will change. The product backlog will evolve before the end of our next sprint. We need to replan every 30 days or less. And we also intuitively know that anything projected 6 weeks out in an IT and certainly in a development environment is a guess at best. It's certainly not a plan. So we're going to reinstantiate our plans as often as we realistically can. This exercise details a very, very common scenario in the real world on Scrum teams. I've seen this so many times I can't even count anymore. The development team's gotten down to the very end of their sprint. They might have a little bit of work left on their sprint backlogs, just not quite finished. And as a result, they don't get to review the increment. They don't get all of the work done that they'd planned or that they'd forecast into this sprint. So the development team naturally says, I'd like a little more time. So we'd like to lengthen, in this case, our sprint to 4 weeks. Now, you're the Scrum Master, and how do you advise this team? Take a couple of minutes, pause the video, and have a discussion, and then come on back and we'll talk about it. Welcome back, and I hope what you decided was to not lengthen the sprint, because that conversation with me as Scrum Master would go something like this. So guys, you're telling me that you're unable to create an accurate forecast of the work that you can get done in 3 weeks. Well, right. And so now what you would like me to do is to give you a 4-week sprint. Well, right. So are you going to take the same amount of work? Well, no, we're going to be able to take a little bit more because, we don't need that whole next week to finish up what we're doing. And so my response to that is, if you can't plan for a 3-week sprint, what makes you think that you can accurately plan a 4-week sprint? In fact, doesn't it make more logical sense to try and plan a 2-week sprint? And that's where I would then do is, instead of going from 3 to 4 weeks, go from 3 to 2 weeks. Go down to a 2-week sprint. And shorter until the team can accurately plan one sprint at least. And removing scope by reducing time is certainly a way that we can do that. And as a general rule, if something hurts, do it more often and you'll get stronger at it, like push-ups or automated builds or deployment. And then you'll not fear it the way you do today.